This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffman.
Rich, today I want to talk about a topic that's been on my mind recently since we had the recording of our podcast with Jay Raffaldini. And there's something he said in that podcast that I thought clicked with me and then had me thinking about some necessary endings that we as entrepreneurs need to have in our lives and in our businesses. And I'll give you a really good example. What Jay said was the typical retail investor buys a stock and rides it all the way down because they fall in love with the stock. They just can't give it up because someday that stock's going to come back. Whereas the professional investors and those that manage hedge funds and do really good returns over years, they've learned to cut their losses fast and double down on their winners. And so as I think about leaders and entrepreneurs, and I think about people in life, just us humans, a lot of times we get this emotional attachment to something. And not to get dark for a minute, but it could be a loved one. It could be a relationship or a marriage. It could be different things we fall in love with that we just want to hold on to for dear life because we were once so proud of that moment, but also in business. We have employees that maybe they were there at the beginning, but now 10 years later or 5 years later, they're not really living up to the expectations you had for them, but you still hold on to them longer. You move them into another role or you do different things. I find a lot of times I'm talking to entrepreneurs that I coach, and I'm curious if you do as well, that sometimes you need to have this necessary ending to move on and free that person up to live their life as well so you can start anew and start fresh because behind every closed door is another opportunity. I'm curious, are you running into that as well? Because I've done it. I've held on to the employee. I've held on to a relationship. I've done these things myself. But now as I'm advancing with more sophistication in my own entrepreneurial journey, there's no more room for that in my life. And I'm curious to have a conversation with you about that today.
One of our former podcast guests actually introduced me to the concept of necessary endings, Gordon Blocker. And there's a book, Necessary Endings, recommend reading it. I think the biggest thing that I understood from Gordon and the book about necessary endings, if you just look at the title, and then I have a way on how to implement it that he taught me.
All right.
If you just look at the title, is that things end all the time. The world that we live in, everything comes to an end. This podcast is going to come to an end. This moment is going to come to an end. Our life is going to come to an end. Your time living in your house is going to come to an end. Your realization of your marriage will come to an end. Either you're going to die, she's going to die, you're going to get a divorce. Like everything ends. We live in a time-bound world. So if we can't get used to allowing the end to happen in a comfortable way, and to your point, we're just grabbing on to every last string to try to keep something in our lives that at one time was pleasurable or we had a dream about, it's going to be very uncomfortable. So the tool that I learned about this, and I learned it from Gordon, is to invite the end. And the way this works is, for example, he had a coaching client, and the coaching client he was working with on organizational health, doing 2-day offsites 4 times a year, doing weekly tactical meetings. And this particular client was getting a little bit big for their britches, a little bit of a know-it-all, questioning the value and this and that. And Gordon just got a little sniff of it. So what Gordon said is, hey, you know what? I think you've learned what you need to have learned from me and the concept for you to be okay on your own. And why don't you go ahead and run it? If you ever need me, I'm here. And his client said, yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. And it was a comfortable end because he invited the end. Now, the trick shot to inviting the end is if it's not actually the end, the other person will let you know. So think about it. He says, okay, I think you've learned enough that you could do this on your own. And if his client said, oh, I'm not comfortable doing that, I'd love to have you into the next offsite we do. Okay, tell me about it. What role do you see me playing? What does that look like? Let's make sure that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you invite the end, you get what is comfortable no matter what. Either it's a comfortable ending and it's time to end, or it's a comfortable, hey, it's not the end, so let's continue. It's when we don't invite the end and we struggle to accept the end is here that it's uncomfortable for everybody involved.
Yeah, I love that. And you can do that kind of analysis and everything. And sometimes it contradicts the theories of business. You're a sales rep. You have a large client. Are you going to go to that client and say, hey, I think we've done enough for you. You should go to our competitors now. So sometimes it contradicts a little bit of business philosophy. But there's one thing that I learned, Rich. I think it was Charlie, one of our mutual friends and mentors, Charlie Chase, or maybe it was others as well, that one day I was going to give somebody a promotion because they requested more money. And the response I got back was, you're basically creating the end. You're putting that person in a very bad position. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm giving them the raise they're looking for. They're looking for this amount of money. I'm going to figure out how to do it and get it out of them and whatever. And like, you're doing that person a disservice because someday they may not be working here anymore and they're not going to be able to make that earning somewhere else. And they're going to build their whole lifestyle around it. It's going to crush them. I didn't quite believe him at the time, but I've seen that be repeated over and over again where we as leaders and entrepreneurs try and accommodate to try and make something work with our team. And really, I never really thought about the reverse side of the other person who you're giving them what they're asking for. But instead, what you should be doing is inviting the end. And it's very uncomfortable to invite the end with somebody you care about, somebody that you work with or whatever. But a lot of times we don't think about the consequences of holding on. So you have an employee at your business who maybe has hit their plateaus, maybe hit their ceiling. They're not learning anything new. They're not providing anything new. And instead of letting them go so they can start a journey somewhere else they're more passionate about, they could get more drive in their business, you feel too good-hearted, you're going to keep them stuck in their own business. And you don't invite that necessary ending. And I have a few on the personal side I may want to jump to in a couple of minutes, but on the business front, I see that retention of people, riding them all the way down, very similar to what Jay Raffaldini talked about, holding a stock all the way down. And if you want to be a really smart and wise leader, ride your winners, but cut your losses when you need to, and do it in a compassionate way. Do it in a way that you really care about the people, but let them have the necessary ending they need as well.
I'm not sure I agree so much on it's counter to how we should do business.
Okay.
And the reason why is, of course, you're not going to take your largest client or even your smallest client potentially, where everything is going well, and you're going to say, hey, I think it should be the end. No, where you're going to do that even with your largest client is where you've had multiple conflicts, where it doesn't seem to be working out, where they bring up to you, hey, I could go to your competitor and I could get this for half the price and they do things twice as fast. That's the moment to invite the end, even with your biggest competitor, is to say, I think maybe it makes sense for you to try that at this point in our relationship and what your needs are. Maybe it makes sense for you to switch.
Yeah.
And if that's what they're already thinking, they're going to be so thankful that you made it easy. If
Yeah.
that's not what they're thinking and they were just trying to squeeze you to go lower on the dollar amount that you charge, they're going to say, well, I'm not saying I want to switch. I was just saying in comparison to, and they're going to sell themselves back into working with you. So, sure, if you just go around inviting the end with everybody, that doesn't make sense. It's counterintuitive to business, but you're picking your spots where it just really doesn't seem to be working out. And can we call a spade? And maybe it's run its course, and that's okay if it has.
Yeah. I love that, Rich. And it's a really good test to the relationship and where things are at and what the true intentions are. If I flip the switch a little bit and didn't think about this before started talking about this topic, but I have a necessary ending in my life where my two boys will be moving out next week, living across the country, and we're going to be childless, empty nesters for the first time.
By the way, Think about how your parents felt. You didn't just live across the country, you lived in a different country.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But that's a necessary ending for us.
It is.
And there's necessary endings with members of their family passing away. There's other necessary endings, divorces and relationships. I had a necessary ending with a big failure of my company where I lost the business and everything. How do you digest necessary endings that are out of your control? You didn't want them to end, but they ended. Do you have any methodology to which you digest that? Because you've had them as well. And what have you learned through those experiences that influences how you help others that you coach that have those happen to them?
Hmm. Thanks for the question. I think it's allowing yourself to feel is the beginning of it, and naming your feelings. So identifying, where are you feeling that in your body? Are you feeling a sinking feeling in your stomach? Are you feeling just lightheaded? Are you identify where in your body you might be feeling something about it? Put a name to it. What is that? Is that remorse that you didn't spend more time with your kids? Is that joy for them, but sadness for you because they're not going to be there when you get home? What is that? Name that. Allow yourself to feel that. And then it's okay to move on from there and look to what's the best case scenario now moving forward. And how do I be the man who I would admire in this scenario? So let me string that together. Number one, where are you feeling it in your body? Number two, name the feeling. What is it you're feeling? Number three, allow yourself to start to look to the future. And number four, think about the man who you would admire in your situation. What would that man do? And that'll give you guidance on what you want to and need to do next.
Wow. Rich, this is what makes you great is you had no idea what we were going to be talking about today.
Nope.
And I sprung this on you and you're able to provide a recipe. And as I'm listening to it, I love the latter components specifically. I love the beginning too, which is allow yourself to feel.
Yeah.
Know what that feeling is, identify it, name
And
it.
don't ignore it. Don't shut it out. Don't
Yeah.
feel bad because you feel bad, because you should feel happy for them. Like,
Yep.
just feel what you're feeling.
Yep. But then I think what is very important, and I think Dr. Henry Cloud talks about it in Necessary Endings as well, and you highlighted it, is you need to re-identify who do you want to be? And knowing what that is and being proud of that and having that be a new chapter of fulfillment and experiences or whatever you want it to be for that matter is really important. I think what happens a lot is people feel like they're not feeling and they're paralyzed. They don't feel like they can go do something else because they're embarrassed that they got fired from their company, or they're embarrassed their marriage didn't work, or they're embarrassed something happened. And so they get in this paralysis mode and they shut down for a period of time. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's multiple years. And that's where I really think really knowing how to digest necessary endings as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as humans is part of what makes life a little special, because you phrase it very well. Everything is going to end, unfortunately. And yet we still hang on to some things that maybe the time has come for it to end. And as I think about my kids, it's just that particular example that I'm living right now. It's time for them to go. It's also time for me to let go and to re-identify, okay, now that they're no longer here during the school year or winter year, how am I going to re-identify myself? And what are some of my passions and goals and experiences, and jump right in versus come back here and sit on the couch and be sad that they're no longer here. Really good formula there that you outlined. Anything else that you'd recommend people think about regarding
I want to
necessary?
expand on that fourth piece.
Okay.
Is what would the man who you would admire do? That's very intentionally worded.
Mm.
So the reason for that is so often one could get caught up in your scenario with what would make my boys happy. Now that I have more time, what's going to make Amy happy? Now that I have more time, what do I do with the business? Now that I have more time, what should I do? And all of that is thinking of yourself in reference to the external, is trying to be something for someone else. So, what I'm recommending is not that. I'm recommending sink deep into your locus of control in yourself, your internal locus of control on what do you want. So, let's strip away what Amy wants. Let's strip away what your boys want. Let's strip away the needs of your business. What does John want? And let's imagine you're watching a movie, and in the movie, boys move away, and here's the dad. What would the dad do that you'd be like, oh my gosh, I actually admire that? I know it's a movie, but I actually admire that, what that person did. So I'll give you an example of that. Maybe you'd say, hey, in the movie, the person sent each of their sons a card every week for the first year. Oh my gosh, I would admire that if I saw that. And boom, that's who you need to be. Now, when you do that, do you need your sons to pour over how thankful they are for getting a card? There are probably weeks they won't even acknowledge it. You don't need that though, because where that was born from was not, what do my sons need? Where that was born from was, who's the man you would admire? Now go be that. You don't need anything from anybody else when you're that. When you're the man you would admire, you don't need people to say thank you. Now, it's nice to say thank you. It's nice to be appreciated. It's nice for the connect. But as long as you're being the man you would admire, you're free of all of that external control, and you're actually guiding the ship.
Yeah, I love that. Love that, because it also is motivational. I want to be that person that I admire.
You do.
Yeah.
So can we ground this?
Yeah.
Let's play. So play the movie for a minute. What would the man who you would admire do? Can you name 2 or 3 things that you would admire if you heard a story about or watched a movie on, or that somebody in your situation would do with their 2 boys moving across a country? What would you admire that you would see somebody else do?
Yeah, I'm playing this out cold. The first thing that's in my plan is I have planned trips to go visit them already, because I think that's what the person I admire would do, is try and figure out how to be present still
How do
in
you
their
be
lives.
physically present with them and get a few trips in the books? You'd admire that man who
Physically
thought about
present.
that in advance?
Yep. The other part is conversations, AKA I call them meetings, with my boys prior to their departure, going through everything from the learning curve, from, okay, here's what's going on, responsibilities, discipline, being able to, hey, call me if you need me, that chart of the checklist of dad son talks that need to be had. I'd admire that. And I'm going to do that before they leave, because I think that's important. A, as for them to know I have their back, but then also B, make sure that they know what to expect when you go through the learning curve. It's the agenda there, so that they're not in shock if they're far away from home 3 months from now and something happens, and they know how to digest that and be ready for that. So that's important for me. And I think the third thing is with them specific. If I take them out of the mix just for a second, because what would a man admire if their kids were out?
Yeah.
Is I think be very intentional with Amy on what we're doing.
Yeah.
I would admire that in terms of what we're doing with the free time. I will continue to work in my business and do different things, but what are we doing to fill in those gaps and maybe do things we've talked about doing that we've never done? And that could be a project in the home, to going to visit people we didn't go visit because the kids are home, those kinds of things. I'd admire like having that bucket list of things that we want to go do together. That I'd admire that. So those are some three things.
Yeah.
I appreciate you asking. It's
curious, what the man who you would admire, what would the ongoing remote communication look like? How often does that man reach out, and in what medium does that man reach out? You could schedule a Zoom call, you can make a phone call, you can mail something, you can text message, what would the man who you would admire do? What does that frequency look like? And what's
so I was going to make that my third one, and then I pivoted to, let me get off the kids for a minute and talk about what I would admire the man doing. But yeah, I was going to say constant communication. It's very tricky as with kids these days, right? The text message versus the phone versus the type of
Yeah.
communication. And that's probably going to be part of my talk with them, which is not just me, but your mother. Are you checking in with her? Are you checking in with me? Is there something wrong? Are you communicating? Are you not communicating? Part of the talk. But I think the man I would admire would have a good pulse on what's going on.
Let me
Never
interject
hesitate
my
to take
experience. I've got two
them.
kids who have been out of the house. One's 25, one's 22. And we just dropped Katie off at Iowa State. That was on Friday last week. So now I have 3 kids out of the house. I can tell you based on my personal experience, you want to have a game plan on how often do you reach out unprompted by them.
Yep.
So you said constant communication. Like, what is that? Is that weekly? You send a text message weekly, and is that the man you would admire? What's that?
Yeah, multiple times a week. And I think a lot of times just knowing my boys and their communication, it would be initiated by myself most times.
Yeah, found too.
Unless they need something. Whereas interestingly, like my wife doesn't initiate as much. Amy doesn't initiate as much. So part of my conversation with them is initiating with their mom.
Yeah.
And I would admire that. I would admire the man who convinces their young men, their young boys, initiate with your mother. I'll initiate with you, but initiate with your mother. That would probably be part of that.
That's great. Playing with me. I know you weren't expecting that, but let's ground this. Like, you've got a real scenario, and let's play with this idea of the man you would admire, and what does that open?
Yeah. And by the way, just to end this, I would say, as a business leader, who would be the business leader you would admire in this situation?
Yeah.
You have a situation that just ended, whether you controlled it or not. And if you're not ending something that should be ended, you should think about that too, because leaders aren't admired when they hold on to people that shouldn't be in the organization anymore, or let the customer abuse their people and keep the customer, or things like that. So I really think thinking about what are some necessary endings you should invite is maybe a really good thought-provoking exercise for those listening to this podcast today. And Rich, you're bang on. I really appreciate the recipes you provided me personally.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'd throw that out almost a challenge to our listeners who are listening right now, is think about 1 to 3 necessary endings that may be coming. You know it, you can feel it. And can you invite the end? And do that relatively soon. Let the other person identify it's not actually the end, or let them identify, thank you, I was thinking the same thing.